Hello, my name is Greg McKay. I'm the chair of the Australian SRV Association. This recording is of a presentation at the Australian SRV gathering held online 22nd of July 2022. The event was hosted by ASRVA, which is the SRV safeguarding group in Australia. We held the gathering for several reasons: to help strengthen the Australian SRV community, to further foster a community of practice identity, to strengthen collegial relationships among and between members of the community, and to focus on SRV in action, its everyday use. We hope you find these presentations helpful, and we again thank presenters. I have the honour really of introducing two people, both from CLP in Adelaide, Katrina Fredberg and Natasha Bennet. Katrina wanted us to know that she's a gym member. Katrina's son also made the point that she should be talking about being a traveller. Katrina is also a circle member, also an auntie, and other roles in her bio. She's co-presenting with Natasha Bennet, and Natasha's a circle facilitator. She's also a family member. Her sister has a disability. And the interesting thing is, just to expand on a comment she's made in her bio, she's a real water person, very connected to the ocean. And so, Katrina, Natasha, are you guys ready? Can I hand over to you now?
Okay, so thank you, Greg. So Tash and I would firstly like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Kaurna land. So thank you for having us. I'm just going to go back a slide. So I'd like to introduce you to Dallas. So 10 years ago, I met Dallas. And by the way, I have permission from Dallas and her family to share her story. I met Dallas as her circle facilitator. Dallas and I are actually the same age. I worked alongside Dallas, her family, and her circle of support for 5 years. When I first met Dallas, she shared with me her dream of swimming in the ocean. Dallas was in the last stages of MS, previously had been living in an institution, then moved to a group home. Some of her wounds were bodily and functional impairment, segregation, socially isolated, and loss of autonomy. The group home's answer of Dallas's love of the water was for Dallas to swim in a hydrotherapy pool each week. Sadly, Dallas is no longer with us, but her PowerPoint that she put together has something to teach us. And this is what makes Dallas's story powerful. And this is in Dallas's words. So I'm just going to read it out. Thank you, Dallas. So Dallas, the free-spirited Pisces. Love of the ocean. I've always loved the ocean. I'm a Pisces, so it's in my blood to be a bit of a fish and a free spirit. What I love about the beach is that your spirit can go free. The closest in the last 5 years I've been able to get to the beach is to look from a distance. I have MS and have been in my wheelchair now for this length of time. It becomes tricky to get your wheelchair anywhere near the ocean and the sand. My dream since I've been in the wheelchair is to go swimming again in the ocean. For most people, this is just simply pursuing an interest. But for me, this is a dream. I've often wondered, how could I feel safe and supported and get myself into that water? With the help of some good thinkers around me, we thought about approaching local surf lifesaving clubs to help make my dream come true. Mum went to my family GP and got him to write a letter recommending how best to carry me into the water since I just recovered from a pressure sore. He wrote about the benefits and not the risks, and just how important this dream was to me, and who better to be out in the water with me than trained surf lifesavers. Seacliff Surf Lifesaving Club were the club that said yes. They were concerned about any possible risks, but as soon as we showed them the letter from my doctor, they were as keen as me to make it happen. Glenn, the president of the club at the time, recommended for me to come down for a meal with family and friends of a Friday night to get to know some of the members and the surf lifesavers. I went down quite regularly and became a familiar face, and whilst we were dining and getting to know one another, we were also planning my first big swim. And the photo down the bottom is Dallas with actually some friends from our art group. They became part of the discussion with surf lifesavers, as well as their family, about helping to make the dream come true. The big day. We finally picked a day that was good for everyone involved. I was able to handpick the surf lifesavers that I wanted to be with me in the water after spending time at the club getting to know them, Glenn, Sue and Steve. We arrived at the beach the afternoon of the swim to see massive waves and gale force winds. Glenn said, "This is the breeziest it's been down here all summer. Can you believe it?" Mum, my sisters, Carrie and Kate, Danny, my brother-in-law and nephews were all there with me with the surf lifesavers. We ummed and ahed as a group and watched the waves and the current for a good half an hour. Glenn, the president, sent out a couple of surf lifesavers to watch them on the boards to see how strong the current was. And the decision was made when I said, "Yeah, Steve, let's do it," in very colourful language. The how-tos. The surf lifesavers had already thought about how to get me to the beach, and that was with the beach buggy, then out to the water by carrying me in a 3-arm carry. And that's Dallas's mum there in the first photo of the beach buggy. And so this is all before having access to wheelchairs that you can use in the water and disability ramps, because this was 10 years ago. So surf's up. Here I am, if you can see me in the massive waves. I'm extremely well supported by everyone out there. I'm leaning against Sue and holding onto a rubber tube. The other surf lifesavers are surrounding me and holding me to make sure I don't end up at Kangaroo Island. That's a little island, obviously, south of South Australia. We did it. My first swim was a big success. As a surprise, Glenn, Sue and Steve made me an honorary member of the Surf Lifesaving Club. So not just a once-off, inclusion treasures diversity and builds community. A nice smooth swim. So I've just been out in the water a second time. This time the conditions were perfect, and since the thought and the planning had gone into the previous swim, it happened just so easy. This time Danny, my brother-in-law, supported me in the beach buggy and also was out in the water with me. He didn't want to miss out on all the fun. So the family really got involved, which was something that was really great about all of this. So here's Dallas getting into the water second time round. Some of the photos aren't that glamorous, sorry. And there she is, just floating away in the water with their friends and members at the club. Getting out of the water. And how happy I am. So I think this photo just says it all. Here I am with Danny, my brother-in-law, after the swim. I really wanted to share how my dream came true, just so others know they can do it too. I really do want to give a massive thank you to the Seacliff Surf Lifesaving Club. Thank you for making my dream come true. And Dallas read this out at the Surf Lifesaving Club as a thank you to them. Now it's not a dream. The club, my family and I committed to having more regular swims. So now it's not about making my dream come true, but simply me swimming at my local Surf Lifesaving Club with other members. I wanted to share my dream with you so others can know that anything is possible with a bit of thought and planning, good people and a community spirit. Thank you. That's Dallas's presentation. So I think, Jane, you share when you had some questions maybe to ask.
Two things. It seems that Dallas and the people in Dallas's life, well, especially other members of her circle, rejected the idea of a hydrotherapy option. And I'm just wondering, you know, what was your thinking around that? It's more than just a values issue, like there's an SRV issue here. What was the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we all knew that wasn't what Dallas wanted, number one. It wasn't the essence of who Dallas was. Like, the first thing that came out of her mouth was, I want to see the ocean, I want to be in the water. And so it just oozed out of her. Like she said, I'm a Pisces, I want to be back down there. So that the hydrotherapy pool wasn't actually the answer of what Dallas wanted. And also, if we had gone down that path, if you think about the experience of being at the club and being in the ocean versus a hydrotherapy pool, just the conversations and the people she's with at the Surf Lifesaving Club versus the people, the therapists and the staff and, yeah, at the hydrotherapy pool, there's really no comparison.
What would have happened had she gone to hydrotherapy from an SRV point of view?
Yeah, so it's therapy-based model, no connection, no opportunity to form connections with people at hydrotherapy. At the Surf Lifesaving Club, she made friends, and it was all around that shared interest of the ocean. And she would have kept going down that therapy path if she'd gone to the hydrotherapy pool.
And you mentioned friends, and you mentioned, this is the second question, mentioned that earlier as well. So thinking about the SRV themes of, and you don't need to get technical with this, but I'm just flagging it for others, around interpersonal identification and social integration. How did you know they were friends? What brought them to be friends? And how did you know they were friends?
Yeah, so it was not only, so obviously, as I said, Dallas said in the presentation, it was around her handpicking the surf lifesavers. So the people that she handpicked were actually people that had connected with her already, people that she felt comfortable with, people that had gone out of their way to get to know her when we're having dinner together, that come up and sit with us and have conversation and join us with a meal. And as well as the friends that she made at the club, she spent time with them outside of the club. She got invited to their home, and even friends that when Dallas passed away, the people that we named in the presentation, they were all at her funeral as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Hello. So I want to introduce Stephen. So Stephen is a man in his 60s. He lives in his own home. He's been living in the area for over 35 years. He used to live with his mother until recently, till about 3 years ago. His mother, Olive, went into a nursing home and sadly passed away in 2019. Steve and Olive were very close, and Olive was a fierce advocate for Stephen and had a really clear vision of what she wanted for him and wanted him to belong and be included in community. Some of the things to know about Steve is that he is a real social creature. He loves a good yarn, catching up with friends for a coffee and a chat. He loves music and old records. He likes going to musicals. He is also very involved in his church community and has been going there for over 35 years. And he really enjoys the church services, and he says he likes the singing and just being in that environment. So for Steve, being involved in church hasn't always been positive. Back in 2012, I started working with Steve around his freely given relationships. And he used to attend a art and craft group that was ran through the church. And he seemed to be having a good time there, and we were hearing positive noises from Steve. But what came back from the church was that Steve was starting to be a bit of a pest and a nuisance in the art and craft group. He wouldn't participate in the art project. He would walk behind the person running the workshop and just continually talk to her and distract her. It meant that she couldn't do her role with helping everyone else in the room, because she was constantly having to deal with Stephen talking to her. So he had this role of being a bother, and he was at real risk of becoming a menace. They asked the service provider involved at the time if they could provide some paid support for Steve to attend the art group. And they came back and said that Steve had been going to this art group on his own for such a long time, and he only had limited funding, and that they were unable to provide paid support for him to attend. So it meant that Steve had to stop going. At the time, I felt disappointment for Steve that he wouldn't be able to connect to his community, to his church community, but thinking about shifting my thoughts and digging a bit deeper around who Steve was, you know, he did like a good chat and a yarn. He wasn't terribly interested in art. And I imagine if paid support was provided, that they would have had a hard job keeping him on task with the art and not continuing with his conversation with the woman that ran the sessions. I imagine he would have still wanted to follow her around and have a bit of a chat. So it wouldn't have ended too well. So, you know, for Steve, it wasn't the best fit for him. And it was an opportunity to think differently about who Steve was, where his strengths were, and what could be done better in the church around roles and involvement. So around that time, a new pastor arrived from the UK, Julie, with her husband, Daniel. She was and is very energetic, engaging, and had some really great new ideas for the church. And it was thought that Julie would be a good person to connect with around thinking on what would be good for Steve in the church community. Where could he become involved, not just participate, but have a role. So Julie was a really good person because she had an understanding of who Steve was. She seemed to just get him. She had the values, so she wanted people to feel belonging in the church community and that everyone was included, not just a few people, but everyone. And there was a spark there between her and Steve. You could see this connection. She really enjoyed his company, really engaged with him around conversation, and just a lovely friendship you could see was growing there. And like I said before, she was a really good thinker, and she had the respect of the family. So Steve's mum, Olive, really respected Julie, and so did Steve. So she was a really good person to approach to see if we could come up with some things at the church. So I met with Julie and we sat down and had a conversation around what was available in the church and what roles could Stephen have that would bring value to his time at church. And we talked about lots of different things. One of them was being a church member and handing out the pew sheets. And Julie was really quick to point out that it wouldn't be a good role for Steve because he does like a chat and he would engage people and want to chat with them, and they would get stuck and wouldn't be able to go and sit down. So that idea, as much as it sounded like a good idea, wasn't really the best fit for Steve. So thinking about his strengths, he did like to help. He is a gracious host, so thinking about places where it is social as well, because he likes to chat. So one of the roles was a volunteering role. So there's a monthly Devonshire morning tea where there's scones and tea, and Steve likes food. And there's also a social element. They talk about Bible scriptures, but also catching up with everyone. And at the end of the session, Barry and Jenny, who are a husband and wife team, they usually do the packing up, but they wanted some extra help. And Steve was recruited to help them pack up at the end of the session and tidy up. The other role was around just being a good church member, and I actually thought this role was really smart. So Reverend Julie, after a service, there's tea and coffee and people can go grab something, but she would always have people coming up to her, and she didn't have an opportunity to go grab a coffee, nor did her husband Daniel. So it was Stephen's role to go and grab them a coffee and bring it over to them. And it was a really important role because it meant everyone in the church would see that Stephen was connecting with with Reverend Julie, the most powerful person in the church. And it was an opportunity for her to check in on him and make sure he was doing okay. Quite often, I would get a call from Julie on the Monday if things weren't right, you know, if Steve looked a bit tired or this or that. So she really did check in on him on those occasions. So those were the roles that we discussed. We did put it to Steve and Olive and said, look, what do you think about these roles at the church? Do you think it's something you'd like to do? And Steve was very quick to jump on board. He wants to help and be involved. And I do recall Olive talking about Steve's roles at the church, and she would often say to people that Steve volunteers at the church, and there was always pride in her voice when she spoke about that. So we fast forward to today, and what has that brought Steve? So the man in the striped shirt on the left is Barry, who does the packing up with Steve at the Devonshire Tea. He has shared with me, Steve does a letter out to friends regularly, telling them what's going on in his world. And Barry really enjoys getting these. He said that Steve has a unique way of seeing the truth of things, and he has a really good wit, and he enjoys reading them because it gives him an opportunity to talk to Steve a bit more on those topics. He is also someone that's advocated for Steve, sent emails when he's had concerns. He's also the person that noticed when Steve was kneeling at church that his shoes had worn through and there were holes at the bottom, and Steve was able to go and get some new shoes. So Reverend Julie has taken on a key role in Steve's life. She's someone who knows Steve's and Olive's vision, and is someone that helps keep the vision on track. She offers emotional support to Steve. Steve, quite often, if something isn't right, it's hard to get it out of him, and Julie is someone that can do that, sit down and talk to him. She also helped him paint his lounge room wall blue, and also they do some social things together as well. I watched the church community rally around Steve when Olive passed away. They were a huge support. They met with him, spoke through what the service would look like for Olive, asked him what he wanted, what words did he want spoken at the funeral. And you know, Steve was able to share that with them, and it was done. He also wanted flowers on his mum's casket. He knew exactly where he wanted to buy them from Olive's florist. So someone went with Steve and he ordered them and was able to share with the florist that his mum had passed away, and the florist had a long-standing relationship with Olive. So yeah, it was nice for Steve to be able to share with people the passing of his mum. I guess too, reflecting back, that there are more people in Steve's network now. When I first started working, we have regular dinners that I help Steve organise, and you know, I'd be lucky to get 2 or 3 people to come along at times. And now Steve, the last gathering that Steve had, we had 12 people there. I think the most we ever had was 25. That was a big night. There are key people that have taken on roles in his life and are his allies, and will come together and think a bit deeply about what Steve needs. He has a positive image around the church, and he has many friendships of people that look out for him at the church. So not just the key allies, but other people more widely. If things are going on for Steve, I can call different people, and I always have someone that I can call on that will check in and look out for Steve. And he is missed. So Steve has had some health issues, and what I hear from people is that they miss him when he's not there, and that he's loved. One of the other things for Steve after Olive's passing was Christmas and spending Christmas on his own. He was really worried about that, but he's been reassured by the church community that he will never be on his own, and Christmas Day he'll always have a place to go. So final reflection. So the last gathering dinner that we had for Steve, there was a woman who'd come along from the church called Sally. I hadn't met her before, and she shared a story with me around Steve and Olive. And when Olive was really unwell and in the nursing home, it was thought that she wasn't going to make it. And Chris, a friend, was going to take Steve down to see Olive at the nursing home. And Chris is a key ally, and her father passed away, so she couldn't do it. And so she was able to talk to Sally, and Sally ended up going with Steve. And when they got there, it was during COVID times, and they were really reluctant to let Steve in. And Sally had to advocate really strongly. She pulled out her registered nurse card and said, you know, we need to go in. And through some clever talking, managed to get her and Steve in to see Olive. And that was the last time that Steve saw Olive. And it just made me wonder if Steve was still seen as a bother or a menace, whether someone would have been with him in that moment, and whether they would have advocated so strongly for him to see his mum. Yeah, so I guess that's the end of my presentation, and if anyone has any further questions at all.
Just while we're waiting, what's the time period for this, for Steve's, time, when he was not well respected at church through to now?
So I guess that was back in 2012 was the art and craft incident, but I guess he has been in various roles for quite some time now, and probably the last, I don't know, perhaps maybe it took a little while for people to get that, but I think maybe 2015 or something, things changed around. We started getting more people coming to the dinners, more people to call on in the network if things weren't going to plan, or just people spending time with him, going places. Yeah.
As others have said before, that these stories are generally not short stories, that it takes time to develop all sorts of roles, and especially solid relationship roles. I can see you nodding. Yeah, thank you. There's a thread of a range of observations about what it takes to create enduring, freely given relationships. So someone said getting the role right to match the person's interests and strengths. Another, how wonderful that paid support didn't step in, but rather a role was found to showcase Stephen's ability. Someone else has observed the power of freely given relationships as a safeguard in terms of someone's life and lifestyle. Someone else has observed the importance of perception in terms of, and making that link between how someone is perceived and therefore how they're treated. So how about I'll pause there, and Natasha or Katrina, do you want to make any observations about about the observations that participants are making. So a comment from you, Natasha, and then Katrina.
Yeah, I guess you know, it does take time, and you know, my role is to be in the background and for people to step forward. I just nurture and make sure the communication is good, so people know what's needed. But it really is about Steve and his relationship with the people at the church and in his network.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I was just going to say, for Dallas, even though she only had the 2 swims, those 2 swims was 2 years of work and getting to know the people. So one swim was one summer and the second swim was the second summer. So yeah, it was a lot of work went into that. It wasn't simply having a swim, but by doing that, it was like a project. She became friends with people at the club and gave the friends at art group as well and the family just opportunity to really deepen her connections at the club.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether it's a nice example of how a task-based role, ocean swimmer, opened the door to the possibilities for relationships.
Yeah.
Just going back to you, Natasha, someone has asked about your role or the roles of people who work within the Circles Circles initiative. And you said that your role, something like that your role is largely around communication, and there was something else as well. But I wondered whether you could say a bit more about what you mean, because yeah, people would have different ideas about what that means. So.
Yeah, I guess my role is to help Steve communicate what he needs with friends. So, you know, quite often I'll meet with Steve and I'll sit there with my computer and he will talk, and we'll do a letter out to friends, letting them know, I guess if he's interested in something and wants to do it, it gets put out to the network. And sometimes it comes back to me and people ask me if I can set something up. Sometimes it comes back to Steve's support staff, and sometimes it comes back to Steve. Yeah, so it's making sure that whatever gets offered actually happens. So it could be me, it could be a support worker, and sometimes when it goes through Steve, it can get a little bit lost. So it's really important that the communication is really clear.
What's the nature of the support to the relationship? So it's very clear that in your role, you're not seeing yourselves as the solution to the need for relationships. You're the facilitator. But what happens in that space between the two people that you're actually supporting?
Yeah, I guess it's you know, sometimes it's not even being there. Being absent and allowing Steve to have his friendships with people. But you know, maybe it's just me setting out an opportunity for him to be in the room with a friend, and then stepping back and letting that happen. People are really quick to come forward for Steve, and they enjoy spending time with him, which you know, rightly so. He's a great guy to be around. He's funny and witty, so you know, it makes my job quite easy.
Okay.
I
What
connect.
Sorry.
There you go.
Well, I was thinking about what we might. Katrina, did you want to answer to that question?
For Dallas, it was creating space, and because she lived in the group home, the space wasn't having conversations or people coming to her home because it wasn't a home. So it was creating opportunities at the Surf Life Saving Club for people to connect and come together. And even with her friends from art group, they lacked confidence of how to be with Dallas, and so it was them coming along to the Surf Life Saving Club, feeling just over time, just getting comfortable and seeing the family role model being with Dallas. And we never had paid support at the Surf Life Saving Club. It was the family. They were offering the support that was needed, and her art friends were able to grow in confidence. And same with her friends from the Surf Life Saving Club.
Did Dallas keep a connection with the surf club leading to other roles?
I think the connection of friendship and the connection of just the being able to have the opportunity to swim. So no, she wasn't able to have other, she had regular dinners in the club of a Friday night. So yeah, I guess you could say that she was a regular dinner goer. But no, it was about the level that it got to. Because of her disability, it was quite tricky, I think, for other roles. But I guess with a lot more thought and crafting, we could have thought about other roles, but yeah, it didn't get to that level.
Okay. What, if any, roles did Steve try to create for himself, and how did this go?
Yeah, I hear from time to time incidental roles that have cropped up now. So Steve is he likes technology and anything electrical, and he has a role now of grabbing the microphones after the Reverend has finished speaking and turning them off to save on the batteries, and he takes them up to the next person. So he has that role, and it's one that I haven't had a hand in at all or discussion. It's something that the church and Steve have come up with together. I think it's just happened naturally around his love of technology.
Right.
So yeah, that's one role that I've heard of just recently, actually.
What about relationships around or with individuals who are tricky to be in a relationship? And from an SRV perspective, the way we might think about that is if people are deeply wounded, that some of the psychological and emotional impacts are, well, one is to push people away.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, just before we wrap up the questions, do you have some comments about going further than what you've already said about supporting relationships?
I guess for me, it's about thinking about where that spark and connection is, and around the interests. What do people share, and really nurturing that part of the relationship. I mean, there's always going to be tricky stuff with anyone, and it's just life. So finding the things that connect people and the glue that holds them together is really key in those moments.
Yeah, and I agree with Tash. And I guess the other part of it was being really honest with the friendships that Dallas was forming about Dallas's reality, her world. So, and sharing those wounds with her friends, because that helped their learning and understanding, and it helped them on the journey as well of being friends with Dallas.
Okay.
I would like to, on behalf of us all, thank you as well. Great stories, heartfelt, and good to see the perseverance that made a difference for people. Thank you very much.